Niger's coup leaders have accused France of gathering forces, war materials, and equipment in several neighboring West African countries with a view to military intervention. Relations with France, Niger's former colonial power, degraded after Paris stood by ousted President Mohamed Bazoum following the July coup. France continues to deploy its forces in several ECOWAS countries as part of preparation for an aggression against Niger, which it is planning in collaboration with this community organization. Niger's region spokesman, Colonel Major Amadou, said on Saturday, the Sahel state is also embroiled in a standoff with the West African bloc ECOWAS, which has threatened to intervene militarily if diplomatic pressure to return Bazoum to office fails. In his statement, Abdrahman said France had deployed military aircraft, helicopter, and 40 armored vehicles to Côte d'Ivoire, Benin. Military cargo aircraft have enabled large quantities of war materials and equipment to be unloaded in Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and Benin Republic, to name but few, he added. On August 3, Niger's coup leaders renounced several military cooperation agreements with France, which has about 1,500 soldiers stationed in the country as part of the wider fight against jihadists. Paris, which refused to recognize the military regime in Niger, does not consider the soldiers who overthrew the president as part of those cooperation deals. The military regime, meanwhile, maintained France forces are now illegally stationed in Niger. On Tuesday, a Paris Defense Ministry source told AFP that the French army was in talks with the military regime over withdrawing elements of its presence in Niger, confirming comments made the previous day by the Niger's regime-appointed Prime Minister Ali. Every day, for more than a week, thousands of people have gathered in the Nigerian capital Niamey around a military base housing French soldiers to demand their departure. The United States, which has about 1,100 soldiers in Niger, has begun to relocate its troops as a precaution from Niamey to the central city of Agadez, the United States Department of Defense said this week. France is engaged in a tug-of-war with Niger, which has also withdrawn the diplomatic immunity of France's ambassador, Sylvain Ite, and ordered police to expel him. France has refused the demand on several occasions, saying the military regime has no legal right to make such an order. On Monday, however, Zaine said discussions were underway about a very swift departure of French troops, but that is government hoped to maintain cooperation with a country with which we have shared a great deal. He also said he was hopeful that his country could come to an agreement with ECOWAS after the coup leaders announced a transition period lasting a maximum of 3 years. The West African bloc has said it does not want Niger to repeat the experience of Mali, Guinea, and Burkina, with which it had to haggle over the durations and conditions of transition period. Now, this video has exposed the consistency of the France government to invade Niger, because we know that France cannot take their eyes off of Niger because of the mineral resources like uranium that they are exploiting from the country. But the question remains, who is now benefiting from all this coup happening in Africa, especially in Niger? Is Russia benefiting from the coup? Listen to this video.
In Niger, earlier this month, the government was overthrown by armed forces who arrested the elected president and took power themselves. Following this, a small fraction of Nigerians, supporters of the coup, gathered in Niamey, the capital city, to voice their approval for the new military regime. Some of them were seen displaying the Russian flag, voicing their contempt for the West, especially France, Niger's former colonial ruler. They were heard chanting praises for Putin and condemning France. This situation has understandably sparked significant concern in the Western world. Since 2020, the Sahel region, a key, hot, semi-arid area extending across Africa just south of the Sahara, has been rocked by coups. Mali's government was toppled in 2020, followed by governmental overthrows in Sudan, Chad, and Guinea in 2021. Burkina Faso experienced a coup the previous year as well. Niger had been viewed as the final stronghold in the Sahel against disorder and instability, and the last regime still in place. The presence of a U.S. drone base and French troops in Niger had been vital in combating the growing threat of West African jihadism. Now, the stability and security in the region are in jeopardy. Many Americans typically overlook Niger, often confusing it with Nigeria, but the events of this summer have delivered a clear message. A pro-Russian military faction overthrew a government that was aligned with the West. What seemed like a return to Cold War dynamics was the transformation of a democratic regime into a military dictatorship. Niger's role as a uranium exporter, vital for nuclear reactors, makes the situation resemble a geopolitical chess match where Niger acts as a pawn, caught between the powerful geopolitical kings. Consequently, the coup has been narrated largely as a tale about America, Russia, and France, rather than focusing on Niger itself. When it comes to interpreting significant international events, especially those happening in regions that are not widely known, a common tendency is to fall into geopolitical bias. This perspective sees incidents through the lens of international strategy, making everything about the more familiar powers and oversimplifying complex situations into narratives that are easily digestible. In the case of Niger's military coup, it has swiftly become a subject for dramatic headlines and broad political assertions that connect it to overarching geopolitical themes. For instance, an advisor to Ukraine's president claimed, without substantiation, that Russia was behind the coup. Bloomberg portrayed the situation as another sign of the long arm of the Kremlin, while Newsweek went so far as to state that Niger's coup signified the start of a countdown to the next major conflict in Africa. It is plausible that Russia may extend its influence as a result of the coup in Niger, and there have been reports suggesting that the ruling junta is seeking assistance from the Wagner Group, a group of Russian mercenaries. However, many of the assumptions regarding Russia's involvement are based on very scant evidence. This includes the actions of a few hundred people during a single protest in one city, where only a handful were seen carrying Russian flags in a nation that is twice the size of France and has a population exceeding 25 million. Given that Niger's capital city was already a hub for opposition before the coup, it should not be unexpected that some of its residents would publicly support the soldiers responsible for overthrowing a president they deeply disliked. The motivations for the coup in Niger are likely intricate, multifaceted, and more centered on internal affairs than on influences from the Kremlin. While it's possible that local and more mundane reasons led to the coup, this doesn't diminish the genuine resentment that many in Niger harbor towards France or the inclination some have to look to Russia as an anti-Western alternative international ally. Yet, the straightforward explanation that has been presented in local media may indeed be the correct one. The sitting president, Mohamed Bazoum, had intentions to dismiss General Abdourahmane Chiani, who was in charge of the elite presidential guard. With the coup's occurrence, General Chiani's dismissal is no longer a concern. Instead, he has declared himself the leader of the newly formed military junta known as the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland. The simplest explanation might indeed be the true one. A general who was facing dismissal decided to oust the president instead. Many coups originate from such basic scenarios, often spurred by internal military factionalism and self-interested individuals with grand ambitions, eager to trade their military positions for political power. Whatever drove General Chiani to take this drastic step, he probably did not foresee the strong resistance he has encountered since taking control. Most global players, including Russia, have denounced the coup, though skepticism might be warranted concerning the Kremlin's statement about upholding the constitution. An unexpected challenge to Chiani's plans has come from a significant regional player, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. This coalition of 15 West African nations, with Nigeria as its most influential member, has adopted a strict stance against the coup, even going so far as to threaten military action. Consequently, some critics have portrayed ECOWAS as a mere tool of Western interests, representing the aggressive tactics of Europe and America. A more straightforward explanation might be the actual reason for ECOWAS's strict stance against the coup. It may not be that ECOWAS is acting as a puppet or that its member states have an ideological opposition to Vladimir Putin. Rather, these governments may simply be acting out of concern for their own stability and survival. Professor Nick Cheeseman, an expert on African politics at the University of Birmingham, explains this stance by saying, "One reason why regional presidents are interested in military intervention is because they're increasingly scared of being taken out themselves. It comes after several other coups in the region, and they realize that they could be next if they didn't draw a line in the sand. The coup in Niger may not have been primarily a result of international rivalry, but rather driven by more local politics and internal dynamics. Nevertheless, it could still lead to significant global consequences. The Sahel region is experiencing a decline in security, exacerbated by the rise of jihadism, and the military juntas that have come to power over the past 3 years have shown themselves to be ineffective in addressing the issue. Although many of these new military governments, particularly in Mali and Burkina Faso, have sought alliances with Russia, the Russian government and the Wagner Group are neither awash with excess funds nor have a surplus of well-trained soldiers ready to be deployed to Africa. They are currently entangled in their own difficulties in Ukraine. In the upcoming months, the regimes that have assumed power after the coups in the Sahel might find that they have exchanged Western allies who possessed considerable financial resources and a commitment to long-term foreign aid for a weakened Kremlin that will probably make grand promises but fall short in fulfilling them. Eventually, the funds will dry up. Europe has a vested interest in Niger's situation. France, with its heavy reliance on nuclear energy, sources approximately 10 to 15% of its uranium from Niger. Additionally, in 2015, the European Union funded Niger's government to effectively establish a Sahel border, curtailing migration routes through Niger toward the Mediterranean. The coup could potentially revive these pathways, breathing new life into the once bustling transit hub of Agadez. The United States also has a stake in Agadez, with the American drone-based Niger Air Base 201 located just outside the town. Should Niger's ruling junta manage to consolidate its power, alignment with Russia appears likely, as evidenced by the interim government's cancellation of multiple military agreements with France. However, the regime may face a stark reality if it attempts to grow closer to the Kremlin. While Russia may have enough resources to fund small groups of mercenaries or bribe opportunistic soldiers, it lacks the financial capability to support the broader population of one of the globe's poorest nations, where the GDP per capita is under $600 annually. Unfortunately, as is frequently the case in sub-Saharan Africa, those who will suffer most are the individuals least able to bear it. The wider population of Niger will likely endure hardship as military personnel turned politicians seek personal enrichment. This narrative, though not a tale of geopolitics, but one of the everyday struggles of millions of vulnerable people, is one that is likely to receive far less attention and coverage.